There are some stories that refuse to stay buried. Stories whispered in the dark corners of history, carried on the wind through cotton fields, etched into the very soil of Mississippi. This is one of those stories. A story about knowledge that became a curse, about healing hands that were called wicked, about a woman whose greatest gift led to her deepest suffering. But most of all, this is a story about the terrible price of justice and how sometimes revenge tastes like ash in your mouth even when you've won. Her name was Adeline. Remember that name. Adeline Sawyer, though Sawyer wasn't her true name, just the brand of ownership stamped onto her identity like hot iron on flesh. In the scorching summer of 1789, on the Thornwood plantation in the heart of Mississippi, Adeline was known for two things: her nimble fingers that could pick cotton faster than any other slave on the property, and her grandmother's medicine. Oh, that medicine, recipes and remedies passed down through generations, from Africa across the terrible Middle Passage, kept alive in whispers and practiced in secret. That knowledge would save her. That knowledge would damn her. That knowledge would change everything. The Thornwood plantation sprawled across 1,500 acres of Mississippi Delta, owned by Master Richard Thornwood and his wife, Mrs. Catherine. Richard was a man of 42 years, with graying temples and a belly that spoke of too much bourbon and too many rich suppers. Catherine was 35, beautiful in that porcelain way that white women of means possessed, with auburn hair always perfectly pinned and dresses that cost more than a slave's entire lifetime worth. They had been married for 12 years without a child, 12 years of Catherine's hopeful pregnancies that ended in blood and tears. 12 years of Richard's growing frustration, which he drowned in alcohol and directed at everyone within reach. But there was another frustration Richard suffered, one he spoke of to no one, one that ate at him in the privacy of his bedroom, that made him avoid his wife's touch, that filled him with a rage that had nowhere to go. The kind of frustration that made a man feel less than a man. You understand what I'm saying, don't you? It was late August when everything changed. The air hung thick and heavy, pressing down on the plantation like a wet wool blanket, the kind of heat that made breathing feel like swallowing fire. Adeline was 24 years old, tall and strong, with hands that knew both the cruelty of cotton thorns and the gentleness of healing. She lived in the quarters with 37 other enslaved people, in a cabin she shared with her mother, Sarah, and her younger brother, Moses. Moses was different, special in ways that made him both blessed and cursed. He was what folks called simple-minded, but Adeline knew better. Moses saw things others didn't, felt things deeper, loved fiercer. I would die for Moses. I would kill for Moses. In the end, I would do both. That August evening, Adeline was called to the big house. This wasn't unusual. She was often summoned to tend to Mrs. Catherine's headaches or to prepare tonics for various ailments. The white folks didn't call it medicine when she did it. They called it that Negro magic, or house remedies, said with a mixture of disdain and desperate need. They would never admit they relied on the knowledge of a slave woman, but they did. Oh, they did.
But this time was different. This time she was brought to Master Richard's study, a room that reeked of cigar smoke and old leather. He sat behind his massive oak desk, and the look in his eyes made Adeline's stomach tighten. She knew that look. Every enslaved woman knew that look. It was the look that said you weren't human, you were property, and property could be used however the owner pleased. "Adeline," he said, his voice rough, "I hear you know things. things, remedies, cures. Yes, master, she replied, eyes fixed on the floor, because looking a white man in the eye could get you whipped or worse. I have a problem, a delicate problem. He poured himself bourbon, drank it in one swallow, poured another. Man's problem. You understand? She understood. God help her, she understood. There are rumors among you people. They say your grandmother knew plants, roots, things that could make a man stronger. He stood, walked around the desk, too close, the bourbon on his breath mixed with sweat and desperation. I need you to make me something, and if you speak of this to anyone, even that idiot brother of yours, I'll have you both whipped until the flesh falls off your bones. Are we clear? Yes, master. That was the moment when I could have said no, could have claimed ignorance, could have run, but I didn't. I wanted to help, God forgive me. I actually wanted to help because I thought if I could cure him, maybe he'd be kinder, maybe he'd give us better rations, maybe he'd let Moses rest when his mind got too tired. I was so foolish, so incredibly foolish. That night, Adeline returned to her cabin and pulled out the small wooden box hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside were bundles of dried herbs, roots wrapped in cloth, small vials of tinctures her grandmother had made before she died, ginseng root from the woods, maca that a traveling slave had brought from far away, horny goatweed that grew wild near the creek, saw palmetto berries. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. These medicines are powerful, child. They heal, but they can also harm. Never use them without understanding the cost. She worked by candlelight, grinding, mixing, measuring. Moses watched from the corner of the cabin, his gentle eyes worried. Addie, I don't like this. Something bad gonna happen. Hush now, Moses. Nothing bad's gonna happen. I'm just making medicine, like grandmother taught me. But Moses shook his head, rocking slightly. The birds were quiet today, Addie. When the birds go quiet, something's coming, something dark. Moses was right. He was always right. The birds knew, the earth knew, everything knew, except me.
3 days later, Adeline delivered the remedy to Master Richard. It was contained in a small brown bottle, enough for a week's worth of doses. She had mixed it carefully, precisely as her grandmother had taught her, with the bark of specific trees, roots dug during the waning moon, and herbs blessed with words her grandmother had made her memorize, even though she didn't fully understand their meaning. It was African medicine, old medicine, the kind that worked because it had worked for thousands of years before white men ever stepped foot in this land. Take 1 spoonful each morning, master, she instructed, her voice barely above a whisper. Mix it with water or tea. Within 3 days, you should feel the change. Richard grabbed the bottle, examined it with suspicion and hope warring in his eyes. And this will work? You're certain? My grandmother used this recipe for 20 years, master. It never failed. It better not fail now, he said, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. Because if it doesn't work, Adeline, I'll assume you're trying to poison me, and you know what happens to slaves who poison their masters. She knew. Everyone knew. They were burned alive, or hung, or torn apart by dogs. The punishment for such a crime was designed to be so horrific that no slave would ever dare attempt it. It will work, master, she said, praying she was right. He dismissed her with a wave, and she fled the big house, her heart hammering against her ribs. Back in the quarters, she found Moses sitting outside their cabin whittling a piece of wood. He had a talent for it, could carve the most beautiful things despite his simple mind. Birds, flowers, tiny human figures with such detail they looked ready to come alive. You gave it to him, Moses said. It wasn't a question. I did. Addie, I'm scared. She sat beside him, put her arm around his shoulders. Moses was 20 years old, but had the innocent heart of a child. He had been born during a difficult labor that left him without enough air for too long. The other slaves sometimes mocked him, called him simple Moses, or touched in the head, but Adeline would fight anyone who dared hurt him. He was her baby brother, her responsibility, her whole heart. Don't be scared, she said, trying to convince herself as much as him. Everything's gonna be fine. How many lies do we tell ourselves to survive? How many times do we pretend the danger isn't real, that the master's wrath won't find us, that tomorrow will be better than today? How many lies until we can't recognize the truth anymore? The remedy worked. Of course it worked. By the end of the first week, Richard Thornwood was a changed man. He walked with a swagger he hadn't possessed in years. His voice boomed with confidence. At dinner, he actually laughed, a sound that made the house slaves exchange worried glances, because they knew what a happy master sometimes wanted to do with his renewed vigor. Adeline heard about it from Clara, the house cook, a woman of 50 with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering. Clara would sneak food to the field slaves when she could, would warn them when master was in a rage, would tend to their wounds when the overseer got too free with his whip. "That medicine you gave him," Clara whispered one evening when Adeline came to fetch water from the well behind the big house. "He's like a young man again. Mrs. Catherine is smiling more. But girl, he keeps asking for you." A chill ran down Adeline's spine despite the evening heat. "What do you mean, asking for me?"
"Wants to see you, private-like, in his study tomorrow night." Clara's hand gripped Adeline's arm. "Be careful, child. I seen that look in a master's eye before. That medicine you gave him, it worked too well." That night, Adeline couldn't sleep. She lay on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to Moses's gentle snoring and her mother's labored breathing. Sarah had been coughing more lately, and Adeline knew it was the cotton dust, the long hours, the poor food, and the 60 years of slavery wearing her body down to nothing. She wanted to make her mother a tonic, something to ease her lungs, but she was running low on supplies and hadn't had a chance to gather more herbs from the woods. I was worried about herbs, about tonics and remedies and my mother's cough. I was worried about everything except what I should have been worried about. I was a fool. The next evening, as the sun set blood red over the cotton fields, Adeline was summoned to the big house. She walked slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The other slaves watched her go, their faces carefully blank, but she could feel their pity. They knew. Somehow, they always knew. Master Richard's study door was open. He sat in his leather chair, a glass of bourbon in his hand, and when he saw her, he smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had cornered his prey. "Adeline, come in. Close the door." She obeyed, her hands trembling. "Your medicine," he said, standing and walking toward her, "is extraordinary. I feel like I'm 20 years old again. Strong, powerful, capable." He was very close now, too close, and she could smell the bourbon and tobacco and something else, something that made her want to run. "I need to make sure it's working properly. Need to test it, you understand? Master, Don't speak," he commanded, his hand grabbing her arm with bruising force. "You're going to help me test this medicine, right here, right now, and if you resist, if you scream, if you tell anyone, I'll have that brother of yours sold so far south you'll never see him again. Or maybe I'll just have him whipped to death. Which would you prefer?" The room spun. Adeline felt like she was falling into a darkness that had no bottom. This was the price. This was always the price. A slave woman had no rights, no protection, no voice. Your body wasn't your own. Your choices weren't your own. You were property, and property couldn't refuse. They tell you slavery is about labor, about picking cotton and building wealth, but that's only half of it. The other half is about power, about one human being having absolute control over another, about being able to take anything you want whenever you want it. That's the real evil of it, the soul-crushing, humanity-destroying evil. What happened next I won't describe in detail. Some horrors are too intimate, too violating to speak aloud. But know this, Richard Thornwood took what he wanted, and Adeline had no power to stop him. When it was over, he buttoned his pants, poured himself another bourbon, and said, "Same time tomorrow night, and remember what I said about your brother." Adeline stumbled back to the quarters, her body screaming, her mind blank with shock. She made it to the cabin, to the water basin, and tried to wash herself clean. But you can't wash away that kind of violation. It seeps into your bones.
bones, into your very soul. Moses found her there, scrubbing her skin raw. "Addie?" His voice was soft, frightened. "Addie, what happened?" "Nothing," she whispered. "Nothing happened, Moses. Go to sleep." But Moses knelt beside her, and his simple, beautiful mind understood what her words wouldn't say. He started to cry, silent tears running down his face. If you're watching this story and feeling the weight of it, the injustice and the cruelty, leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because this story gets darker before it finds any light, and Adeline's journey is one that needs to be heard and remembered.
The abuse continued for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Adeline being summoned to that study, of Richard Thornwood using his renewed vitality on her helpless body, of threats about Moses keeping her silent. 3 weeks of washing herself until her skin was raw, of avoiding her mother's knowing eyes, of holding Moses when he cried because he understood more than anyone gave him credit for. But something else was happening during those 3 weeks. Something that would change everything. Mrs. Catherine Thornwood was pregnant. The entire plantation buzzed with the news. After 12 years of failed pregnancies, of miscarriages and stillbirths and disappointment, Catherine was finally carrying a child that seemed to be thriving. The plantation doctor came twice a week to check on her. Richard was jubilant, already planning for his heir, already imagining a son to carry on the Thornwood name. And Adeline? Adeline was also pregnant. She knew before she even missed her monthly bleeding. She felt it in her body, felt the change, felt the tiny spark of life growing inside her. A life created through violence, through the worst kind of violation. A child she had never wanted, conceived in the most terrible way possible. How do you feel about a child born from rape? How do you separate the innocent life from the violence that created it? I wrestled with this every day, every hour. Part of me wanted to find some root, some herb that would end this pregnancy before it truly began. But another part of me, the part that loved Moses despite everything, couldn't bring myself to do it. Life is life, even when it's born from death and darkness. She told no one, not her mother, not Moses, and certainly not Master Richard. She bound her belly, worked the fields until her back screamed, and prayed that maybe the hard labor would solve the problem for her. But the pregnancy held. The child inside her was as stubborn as she was. Meanwhile, Catherine's pregnancy progressed beautifully. She glowed with health, walked the plantation grounds with her hand on her swelling belly, spoke to the slaves about preparing a nursery. Richard reduced his nighttime summons of Adeline, too focused on his wife and the promise of legitimate heir to bother much with the slave woman anymore. For this, Adeline was grateful, even though she knew it was temporary. Men like Richard always came back for what they considered theirs. It was during the 4th month of Catherine's pregnancy that Adeline met Samuel. Samuel was a new arrival to Thornwood Plantation, purchased from an estate sale in Louisiana. He was 30 years old, tall and muscular from years of blacksmith work, with intelligent eyes and hands that knew how to shape metal into tools, weapons, or works of art. He had been educated by his previous master, could read and write, which was illegal for slaves in Mississippi, but useful for masters who needed someone to keep records. Richard put Samuel to work in the plantation forge, repairing tools and shoeing horses. The forge was near the edge of the quarters, and Adeline passed it every morning on her way to the fields. One morning, Samuel called out to her. "You're Adeline," he said. It wasn't a question. She stopped, wary. "How you know my name?" "Everyone knows your name. You're the medicine woman, the one who cured the master." His eyes held hers, and there was something in them that made her heart skip. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "I know about plants, too. My grandmother was a healer in Louisiana before they sold her away." They talked for only a few minutes that first morning, but it was enough. Enough to plant a seed of something Adeline hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not hope for freedom, not hope for escape, but hope that maybe she wasn't completely alone in this nightmare. Over the following weeks, weeks, Adeline and Samuel began to talk more. Brief conversations when she passed the forge, slightly longer ones during the Sunday rest period, when slaves were allowed a few hours to themselves. Samuel had a quiet strength about him, an intelligence that he carefully hid from the white overseers, but shared with her. He told her about his life in Louisiana, about the books he had secretly read, about the rebellion he had heard whispers of in other states. One day, he said softly, all of this gonna end. Slavery can't last forever. It's too evil, too wrong. Something's going to break. When? Adeline asked bitterly. When we're all dead and buried?
Maybe, but maybe your children will see freedom. Maybe their children will. He looked at her carefully. You carrying a child, aren't you? She froze. How did you? I noticed things. The way you hold yourself. The way you avoid certain foods. I had a sister once before they sold her. I remember the signs. His voice gentled. It's the masters, isn't it? Tears spilled down her face before she could stop them. She had held this secret so tightly, had carried it alone for so long, and now here was someone who saw, who understood, who didn't judge. He forced himself on me, she whispered. For weeks, I couldn't stop him. He threatened Moses. Samuel's jaw clenched, fury blazing in his eyes. That devil, that absolute devil. He took her hand carefully, respectfully. Adeline, you listen to me. That child ain't got nothing to do with what he done, you hear me? Nothing. Whatever you decide about this baby is your choice, but don't hate the child for the father's sins. In that moment, Samuel gave me something I desperately needed. Permission to feel all my conflicted emotions. Permission to hate Richard while not hating the life inside me. Permission to be human in a world that treated me as less than human. But then came the day that everything shattered into pieces too sharp to ever put back together. It was late September, and Catherine Thornwood lost her baby. She was 5 months pregnant when the cramping started, when the bleeding began, when the child that had promised so much hope slipped away in a tide of grief and grain. The plantation doctor was called, but there was nothing he could do. The baby was gone, and Catherine was left hollow and broken. Richard's rage was terrible to witness. He smashed furniture, screamed at servants, fired his pistol into the air like he could shoot down God himself for this injustice. He had been so close to finally having an heir, and now it was gone. Again, always again. And then someone, some well-meaning or perhaps malicious house slave, mentioned that Adeline was pregnant. Clara came running to the fields, her face pale with terror. Adeline, Adeline, you got to run. The master knows. He knows about your baby, and he's convinced you did something to Mrs. Catherine's pregnancy. He's calling it witchcraft, saying you cursed the baby. Adeline's blood ran cold. What? I didn't do anything. I've been in the fields for months. Don't matter what you did or didn't do. He needs someone to blame, and you're carrying proof of what he done to you. He can't let that child be born. Can't let people see. He's coming for you, girl. He's coming right now. Samuel appeared from the forge, hammer still in hand. She's right. I just heard the overseer. They're organizing a search. Adeline, you need to hide. I can't leave Moses. I can't leave my mother. You don't got a choice. Clara grabbed her arm. They're gonna kill you, child. They're gonna call you a witch and burn you alive. You know how they do. In slavery, you're always choosing between impossible options. Stay and die, or abandon the people you love. Fight and be destroyed, or submit and lose your soul. There are no good choices, only different kinds of suffering.
Adeline ran, not because she wanted to, but because Clara and Samuel pushed her toward the woods, because survival instinct kicked in, because some primal part of her brain understood that staying meant death. She ran into the forest that bordered the eastern edge of Thornwood Plantation, the same forest where she had gathered her herbs and roots, where her grandmother had taught her to identify healing plants and avoid poisonous ones. Behind her, she could hear the shouts of the search party, men's voices, dogs barking, the sound of horses crashing through undergrowth. They were hunting her like an animal, and in Mississippi in 1789, that's exactly what she was in their eyes. Property that had malfunctioned, a dangerous tool that needed to be disposed disposed of. She ran until her lungs burned, until her pregnant belly cramped with pain, until she couldn't run anymore. She found a hollow beneath a fallen oak tree, crawled inside, and tried to make herself as small as possible. The earth was damp and smelled of rot and mushrooms. Insects crawled over her arms, her face. She didn't move, didn't breathe, just listened to the sounds of the hunt passing by, passing over, moving away. It was full dark when she finally emerged. The stars overhead were bright and indifferent, the same stars that had watched over millions of enslaved people suffering beneath them, the same stars that would watch millions more before this evil finally ended. Adeline knew she couldn't go back. Not to the quarters, not to Moses, not to her dying mother. Going back meant torture and execution. It meant being made an example of. It meant they would tie her to a stake and light the fire and make every slave on the plantation watch as she screamed and burned. That was the price of being accused of witchcraft, of being accused of cursing a white woman's pregnancy. The irony was almost funny, almost. She had healed Richard, had given him back his manhood, and he had rewarded her with rape and violence. Now his wife had lost a baby, something that had nothing to do with Adeline, and she was being blamed for it. Blamed for having the audacity to be pregnant while Catherine was not. Blamed for existing, for knowing things, for being visible. They always find a way to blame us. When things go wrong, when white folks suffer, they look for a black face to punish. We're the scapegoats for their failures, their sins, their disappointments. Always have been. And in 1789, there was no law to protect us, no justice we could appeal to, no safety anywhere. She wandered through the forest for 3 days, eating wild berries and drinking from streams, hiding from every sound, every snap of a twig. She knew these woods, but being alone in them, pregnant and terrified, made them feel hostile and strange. At night, she heard the dogs in the distance, still searching. During the day, she saw smoke from the plantation and wondered if they were burning something or someone. On the 4th day, weak with hunger and exhaustion, she was found, but not by Richard's men. Samuel emerged from the trees like a ghost, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. His face was grim, his eyes red-rimmed, and Adeline knew before he spoke that something terrible had happened. "Samuel, how did you find me?" "I've been looking for 3 days. Told them I was checking hunting traps in the woods." He knelt beside her, opened the bundle. Inside was cornbread, dried meat, and a water flask. "Eat. You need strength." She ate ravenously, barely chewing, her body screaming for nourishment. When she finally slowed down, she looked at Samuel's face and saw the devastation there. "What happened? Just tell me." "It's Moses," he said quietly, and Adeline's world stopped. "The master, he was so angry about you escaping, so furious he couldn't find you. He needed to punish someone. And Moses tried to defend you, told the master you were a good person, that you never hurt nobody, that you didn't curse Mrs. Catherine." No, please, no." "They whipped him, Adeline. Whipped him so bad." Samuel's voice broke. "He lasted 2 days. Your mother held him while he died. She told me to tell you. She said tell you that Moses's last words were, 'Don't let Addie blame herself. It ain't her fault. None of this is her fault.'" The sound that came out of Adeline wasn't quite human. It was the sound of a soul being ripped apart, of everything good and pure being destroyed. Moses, her sweet, gentle, simple-minded brother who had never hurt anyone, who carved beautiful things from wood, who saw the world with innocent eyes, dead, murdered because of her, because she had healed a monster and been punished for it. She screamed until her throat was raw, until Samuel had to hold her to keep her from running back to the plantation, from throwing herself at Richard's feet and begging him to kill her too. "He wanted this," Samuel said fiercely, gripping her shoulders. "He wanted you to come back, wanted to capture you and burn you. That's why he killed Moses, to draw you out. You can't give him what he wants. You have to survive. You have to live. For Moses, for your mama, for that baby you're carrying." "I don't want to live," she sobbed. "I want my brother. I want my brother."
brother back." I know, Adeline, but he's gone, and you're still here, and you gotta keep being here." They stayed in the forest for another week. Samuel brought food when he could, risked his own life to keep her alive. He told her what was happening on the plantation. Richard had declared Adeline dead, killed while trying to escape. He had told everyone she was a witch who had cursed his wife, and her death was divine justice. Catherine had locked herself in her room and wouldn't come out, drowning in grief and laudanum. The other slaves whispered about Moses's death, angry and scared, but powerless to do anything about it. "Your mother is sick," Samuel said one evening. "The cough got worse after Moses died. She's asking for you, but I can't bring her out here. She's too weak to walk that far. I want to see her. I need to see her." "It's too dangerous. They're still watching for you. Still got patrols." But that night, Adeline snuck back to the plantation anyway. She had to see her mother, had to say goodbye, because she could feel in her bones that Sarah was dying. She crept through the darkness, avoiding the main paths, using every trick her grandmother had taught her about moving silently through the night. She reached the quarters and slipped into her old cabin. Her mother lay on the mattress, so thin she looked like a skeleton, her breathing wet and labored. When she saw Adeline, tears slid down her withered cheeks. "My baby, my sweet girl, I knew you'd come." Adeline held her mother, felt how light she had become, how close to death. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry about Moses. I'm sorry about everything." "Hush now. Ain't nothing to be sorry for. You didn't kill Moses. That devil master did. You hear me? That devil and his devil wife." Sarah gripped Adeline's hand with surprising strength. "But baby, listen to me. Listen good. You got knowledge. You got power. And you carrying a child that's going to have that power too. Don't let them destroy you. Don't let them win." "How do I stop them, Mama? How do I make them pay for Moses?" Sarah smiled, and it was terrible and beautiful at the same time. "You know how, baby. You know plants. You know medicines. You know what heals and what kills. You're a smart girl. You'll figure it out." She coughed, a deep rattling sound. "Promise me something. Promise me you'll survive. Promise me you'll make sure they remember what they done." "I promise." "Good girl. Now go, before they find you here." Adeline kissed her mother's forehead, breathed in her scent one last time, and fled back into the night. 3 days later, Samuel brought news that Sarah had died in her sleep. Within a month, Adeline had lost her brother and her mother, had lost everything she loved in this world, except her rage. That she kept, that she nurtured, that she let grow inside her alongside the baby, feeding it with memories of Moses' gentleness and her mother's final words. "Grief can destroy you or transform you. I chose transformation. I chose to let my grief become something sharp and focused, something with purpose. They had taken everything from me. Now I would take everything from them."
Adeline stayed in the forest for 2 more months, hidden and watchful. Samuel brought her food and news, risked his life daily to keep her alive. During that time, her belly grew, the child inside her becoming more real, more present. She talked to it sometimes, this baby born from violence, and tried to find some feeling other than resentment. Sometimes she managed it, sometimes she didn't, but mostly she planned. Her mother's final words had planted a seed that grew as surely as the child in her womb. "You know what heals and what kills. You're a smart girl. You'll figure it out." Adeline knew plants. She knew roots and barks and berries. She knew which ones brought health and which ones brought death. She knew foxglove could slow or stop a heart. She knew oleander could cause vomiting and seizures. She knew water hemlock could kill in hours with the right dose. And she knew how to disguise poisons in tonics, how to make death look like natural illness, how to be patient and careful. When you have nothing left to lose, when they've taken everything you love, morality becomes flexible. I'm not proud of what I planned, but I'm not ashamed either. They had killed my brother, worked my mother to death, raped me, and hunted me like an animal. What did they expect? Forgiveness? Acceptance? No. They taught me that mercy was weakness, that power was everything, that black lives
lives meant nothing, so I learned the lesson well. But Adeline was smart enough to know she couldn't just kill Richard and Catherine. That would bring immediate suspicion, immediate investigation. No, she needed to be subtle. She needed to appear helpful, innocent, necessary. She needed them to want her back, to need her medicine again. And then, in late November, opportunity presented itself. Samuel came to her forest hiding place with urgent news. Mrs. Catherine is sick, real sick, some kind of fever that the plantation doctor can't cure. She's been asking for you, saying your medicine helped her before with headaches, that maybe you could help with this. She's asking for me, the woman whose husband accused me of cursing her pregnancy? She doesn't blame you. She knows it was just bad luck, another miscarriage like all the others. She thinks her husband is crazy with grief and rage. She's scared of him now, won't let him touch her. Samuel paused. This could be your way back. If you heal her, they might let you return to the plantation, stop hunting you. Adeline smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Yes, I could heal her, or I could do something else. Samuel's eyes widened. Adeline, what are you thinking? I'm thinking that if I'm already accused of being a witch, already blamed for Catherine's miscarriage, already hunted like an animal, then maybe I should give them what they fear. Maybe I should be the witch they say I am. That's dangerous talk. My brother is dead, Samuel. My mother is dead. I'm hiding in the woods like an animal, pregnant with a child I never wanted, conceived through rape. What else can they take from me? She touched his face gently. I know you've been good to me, kind when nobody else was. I don't want to pull you into this darkness. I'm already in it, he said quietly. The moment I started helping you, I chose a side. So tell me your plan. Over the next 2 days, Adeline explained what she intended to do. It was risky, elaborate, and required perfect timing, but it was possible. Everything she needed grew in these woods, and she knew how to prepare it, how to dose it, how to make it look like natural illness. Samuel's role was simple but crucial. He would tell the plantation that he had found Adeline, that she was sick and weak, but willing to come back and help Mrs. Catherine if she was promised safety. Richard would agree because Catherine was deteriorating and the doctor was useless. They needed Adeline's medicine. The plan worked exactly as predicted. 3 days later, Adeline walked back onto Thornwood Plantation, visibly pregnant, visibly exhausted, but alive. Richard looked at her with barely concealed fury and disgust, but Catherine's desperation overrode his pride. You'll help my wife, you'll cure her fever, and then we'll discuss your punishment for running away. Yes, master, Adeline said meekly, eyes on the ground. She was taken to Catherine's bedroom, where the white woman lay pale and sweating, her beautiful auburn hair lank and lifeless. When Catherine saw Adeline, she actually cried. Oh, thank God you're here. I'm so sick, Adeline, so terribly sick. The doctor's medicines do nothing. I need your remedies, please.
It's strange, isn't it, how the same people who treat you as less than human will turn to you when they need something, how they'll curse you and fear you and hunt you, but the moment they're suffering, suddenly your Negro magic becomes acceptable, even necessary. The hypocrisy would be funny if it wasn't so damned tragic. Adeline examined Catherine carefully, professionally. The fever was real enough, probably influenza or some other illness that would pass on its own with rest and fluids, but Adeline wasn't going to let it pass. She was going to make it much, much worse, slowly, carefully, so slowly that no one would suspect. I'll need to make a special tonic, Adeline said. It will take several days of treatment. You must drink it 3 times daily without fail. Yes, anything. Just make me well. That night, in the small room they had given her near the kitchen, Adeline prepared her medicine. She used foxglove, but not enough to kill quickly, just enough to weaken the heart gradually, to cause fatigue and nausea that would seem like the illness getting worse rather than poison. She added elderberry and mint to mask the taste, honey to make it palatable, and she added one more ingredient, something that would ensure Catherine's suffering mirrored her own, tansy oil, known to cause miscarriages and prevent pregnancy. Catherine would never carry another child to term. term, never know the joy of motherhood, never give Richard his heir. It was a small revenge, perhaps, but it was a start. For Richard, Adeline had something different planned, something slower, more subtle, more devastating. She requested permission to restore his male vitality medicine, claiming the stress and grief had likely weakened him again. Richard agreed eagerly, embarrassed to admit his problem had returned, but desperate for the solution. Adeline prepared a new batch of her original remedy, but this time she added mercury, not a lot, just enough to accumulate in his system over months, causing tremors, confusion, rage, and eventually madness. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but sometimes it needs to simmer for a long time, needs to be prepared with care and precision. I wasn't interested in quick satisfaction. I wanted them to suffer the way Moses suffered, the way my mother suffered, the way I suffered. I wanted them to feel helpless and hopeless and desperate. I wanted them to know what it felt like to have everything stripped away. Within a week, Catherine was worse despite Adeline's treatment. Within 2 weeks, Richard was showing signs of improvement in his vitality, but also strange mood swings and occasional tremors he attributed to stress. Within a month, the plantation was a powder keg of tension and illness. And Adeline? Adeline played her role perfectly. The concerned healer, the dutiful slave, the grateful woman who had been allowed to return. She tended Catherine day and night, brought Richard his medicine with a bowed head, and slowly, methodically destroyed them both from the inside out. Samuel watched with growing concern. "How long are you going to continue this?" he asked one night. "As long as it takes," Adeline replied, her hand on her swollen belly. "This child will be born into freedom or not at all, and I will make sure Richard and Catherine Thornwood pay for every sin they committed." "And then what? They die? And what happens to you, to us, to all the slaves here?" It was a good question, one Adeline didn't have a complete answer to, but she knew one thing. She was done being powerless, done being a victim. If she was going to die, if she was going to lose everything anyway, then she would make damn sure they went down with her.
January 1790 arrived with bitter cold, unusual for Mississippi. The frost killed some of the winter crops, and the slaves shivered in their thin blankets, huddled together for warmth. Adeline was 8 months pregnant now, her belly enormous, the child inside her active and strong. Sometimes she felt it kick and wondered what kind of life this baby would have. Sometimes she felt it move and remembered how it was conceived and had to fight the urge to hate it. Catherine Thornwood was bedridden now, too weak to stand, her heart struggling with each beat. The plantation doctor was baffled by her continued decline despite Adeline's treatments. He suggested calling a specialist from New Orleans, but Richard refused, convinced that would be an admission of weakness, an acknowledgement that his plantation couldn't even keep his wife healthy. Richard himself was deteriorating in different ways. The tremors had gotten worse, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold a teacup. His moods swung wildly from euphoria to rage, from paranoid suspicion to maudlin sentimentality. He accused the slaves of stealing from him, then gave them unexpected rewards for no reason. He fired the overseer, then hired him back the next day. The house slaves walked on eggshells, never knowing which version of Master Richard they would encounter. But he still took his medicine faithfully, still believed Adeline's tonics were helping him, still trusted the slave woman who was slowly poisoning him. One cold February morning, something unexpected happened. Clara came to find Adeline in Catherine's room, her face pale with shock. "There's a man here to see the master," she whispered. "Official-looking white man from Jackson. Says he's from the territorial government. He's asking questions about Moses." Adeline's blood ran cold. What kind of questions? About how he died, about the circumstances. Someone sent a letter, an anonymous letter, saying a slave was murdered here without cause or trial. The government man wants to investigate. Even in Mississippi in 1790, even in the heart of slavery territory, there were some laws, not many, and not often enforced, but they existed. A master wasn't supposed to kill his slaves without reason, because slaves were property, and destroying property without cause was still destruction. It wasn't about morality. morality or justice. It was about economics, about protecting the investment of other slaveholders. But sometimes, just sometimes, those laws could be used against the masters themselves. Adeline's mind raced. Who would have sent such a letter? Who could write? And then she knew. Samuel. Samuel could read and write. Samuel must have sent the letter. The investigation lasted 3 days. The government official interviewed slaves, examined records, inspected the plantation. Richard was furious, humiliated, defensive. He claimed Moses had been insubordinate, had attacked an overseer, had needed to be disciplined. But the official was thorough, and he noticed discrepancies in the stories, noticed how the slaves flinched when Richard spoke, noticed the fear that permeated the plantation. In the end, the official couldn't prove murder. The burden of proof was too high. The testimony of slaves wasn't legally admissible, and Richard had enough political connections to make the investigation uncomfortable for everyone involved. But he issued a warning: another questionable death on Thornwood Plantation, and there would be serious consequences. After the official left, Richard's paranoia intensified. He became convinced that the slaves were plotting against him, that they had somehow contacted the authorities, that they were trying to destroy him. The mercury poisoning was accelerating his mental deterioration, turning suspicion into delusion. One night, in a drunken rage fueled by poison and madness, Richard gathered all the slaves in the main yard. It was midnight, freezing cold, and everyone was terrified. He stood on the porch of the big house, a pistol in his shaking hand, and screamed at them. "I know one of you sent that letter. I know you're plotting against me. I've given you food, shelter, protection, and this is how you repay me? With betrayal?" He fired the pistol into the air, making everyone flinch. "I should sell every last one of you, should burn this whole place to the ground rather than let you ungrateful wretches destroy what I've built." Adeline stood in the crowd, her pregnant belly making her conspicuous, and watched as the man who had raped her, who had killed her brother, who had worked her mother to death, unravel before her eyes. The mercury was working. The poison was doing its job, but not fast enough. She needed to accelerate the timeline. That night, she doubled his dosage.
Within a week, Richard was hallucinating. He saw insects crawling on his skin, heard voices accusing him of crimes, became convinced that his slaves were turning into demons. The plantation descended into chaos as the master lost his grip on reality. The overseer tried to maintain order, but without clear direction, everything started to fall apart. Catherine, meanwhile, was dying. Her heart was giving out, her body shutting down, and she knew it. One afternoon, she called Adeline to her bedside and looked at her with fevered, knowing eyes. "You're killing me, aren't you?" she whispered. Adeline could have denied it, could have played innocent, but something in Catherine's gaze demanded honesty. "Yes," she said simply. Catherine nodded slowly. "I thought so. The medicine was supposed to help, but I only got worse. You're a clever woman, Adeline, smarter than any of us gave you credit for." She coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Is it because of the baby? Because I lost my child?" "No," Adeline said. "It's because your husband raped me for 3 weeks. It's because he killed my brother Moses for defending me. It's because this whole system is evil, and you and Richard are part of that evil, whether you personally wielded the whip or not." Tears slid down Catherine's pale cheeks. "I knew about what Richard did to you. I heard the rumors, saw the signs. I didn't stop it because I was weak and scared and selfish. I wanted a baby so badly, I let myself ignore what he was doing to you." She reached out with a trembling hand. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't mean anything. I know sorry can't undo any of it, but I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring Moses back," Adeline said coldly. "Sorry doesn't erase what was done to me. Sorry is just words. I know, but I need to say them anyway." Catherine closed her eyes. "How long do I have? Days, maybe a week. And Richard? Longer. Months, perhaps. But he'll lose his mind first. He's already halfway there." Catherine laughed bitterly. "Good. He deserves madness. He deserves worse." She looked at Adeline's belly. "What will you do about the baby?" "I don't know. If it's a girl, will you tell her about me, about this conversation? Maybe, if she asks. Tell her. Tell her that not all white women are evil. Some of us are just weak and complicit, which might be worse. Tell her to be stronger than I was. Tell her to fight the evil, not just benefit from it." I didn't forgive Catherine in that moment. I still haven't forgiven her. But I understood something.
Evil isn't always loud and violent like Richard. Sometimes it's quiet and passive like Catherine. Sometimes it's the sin of looking away, of not speaking up, of choosing comfort over justice. Both kinds of evil destroy lives. Both kinds need to be held accountable. Catherine Thornwood died 2 days later, in the early morning hours, her heart finally giving out. She died in her sleep, peacefully, which was more mercy than Moses got, more mercy than thousands of enslaved people got. But Adeline didn't feel particularly victorious. Revenge, she was learning, didn't taste as sweet as she'd imagined. Richard's reaction to his wife's death was terrifying. He became convinced she had been murdered by witchcraft, by African magic, by the evil forces he believed surrounded him. He started seeing Adeline both healer and demon, needed her medicine, but feared her presence. The mercury had pushed him fully into madness. And then, on a cold March morning, Adeline went into labor.
The pain came in waves, relentless and all-consuming. Adeline had helped deliver babies before, had seen her mother bring children into the world, but experiencing it herself was entirely different. It felt like her body was being torn apart from the inside, like every muscle was rebelling, like death might actually be a mercy. Clara and 2 other house slaves attended her, bringing hot water and clean cloths, whispering encouragement and prayers. Samuel stood outside the cabin door, pacing, forbidden from entering because childbirth was women's territory, but unable to leave because his heart wouldn't let him. The labor lasted 18 hours. 18 hours of screaming and sweating and bleeding. 18 hours of pushing and praying and cursing. And then, finally, as dawn broke on March 15th, 1790, the baby emerged into the world. "It's a girl," Clara announced, her voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Adeline lay back, exhausted beyond measure, and waited to feel something. Love, hate, connection, revulsion, anything. But all she felt was emptiness and bone-deep fatigue. Clara cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a thin blanket, then placed her on Adeline's chest. The baby had light brown skin, softer than Adeline's deep ebony, a blend of black and white heritage that marked her as born from violence. Her eyes were closed, her tiny fists clenched, and she made small mewling sounds that should have been adorable, but just made Adeline's chest ache with complicated emotions. "What you gonna name her?" Clara asked gently. "I don't know. I haven't thought about it." "She needs a name, child. Every baby needs a name." Adeline looked at her daughter, this small life that had been created through the worst moment of her existence, and thought about her mother's final words. "You carrying a child that's gonna have that power too. Don't let them destroy you. Don't let them win." "Grace," she whispered. "I'll name her Grace, because if she survives this world, it will be by grace alone." I didn't love Grace at first. I want to be honest about that. Looking at her felt like looking at my own violation, my own powerlessness. But I didn't hate her either. She was innocent. She hadn't asked to be conceived through rape, hadn't asked to be born into slavery, hadn't asked for any of this. So I fed her and held her and tried to feel something other than numbness. News of the birth reached the big house quickly, and Richard's reaction was immediate and violent. He stormed down to the quarters, still in his nightclothes, his hair wild and his eyes showing too much white. "That child," he screamed, pointing at Grace with a trembling finger, "that child is evidence, evidence of sin and shame. She cannot be allowed to live." Samuel stepped between Richard and the cabin. "Master, she's just a baby, an innocent baby." "Innocent? She's the spawn of a witch, the proof of fornication and evil." Richard was frothing at the mouth, completely unhinged. "I'll have her drowned like an unwanted kitten. I'll have her—" "You'll do nothing," came a voice from behind him. Everyone turned to see the plantation doctor, Dr. Harrison, who had been staying at the big house since Catherine's death. He was an older man, in his 60s, who had practiced medicine for 40 years and had seen enough of slavery's cruelties to be thoroughly disgusted by them, even if he profited from the system. Richard, you need to calm yourself. You're not well. You haven't been well for months. I'm perfectly fine. It's everyone else who's sick, everyone else who's corrupted. Dr. Harrison looked at Richard with clinical assessment, noting the tremors, the dilated pupils, the erratic behavior, the paranoid delusions. When did these symptoms start? The shaking, the mood changes. I don't know what you're talking about. But Clara, bless her brave soul, spoke up. Around November, doctor. Right after Adeline came back and started giving him his medicine again. Dr. Harrison's gaze shifted to Adeline, who stood in the cabin doorway with Grace in her arms, and something like understanding passed across his face. He had seen mercury poisoning before. He recognized the signs. Adeline, he said carefully, what exactly was in the medicine you gave Master Thornwood? She could have lied, could have listed the legitimate ingredients and left out the poison, but she was tired of lying, tired of hiding, tired of surviving by making herself small and invisible, and she knew that whatever happened next, Grace would be born into a world where her mother had chosen truth over safety. Mercury, she said clearly, mixed with ginseng and other herbs to mask the taste. I've been poisoning him since November, the gathered slaves gasped. Richard lunged toward her, but Samuel grabbed him, held him back. Dr. Harrison simply nodded, as if his suspicions had been confirmed. And Catherine, he asked, foxglove, to weaken her heart. She died naturally, but I helped nature along. Confession is supposed to be good for the soul, they say, but all I felt was tired, so incredibly tired. I had killed 2 people, had committed murder in the slowest, most premeditated way possible. I should have felt guilty or triumphant or something, but I just felt empty. She's confessed. She's admitted to murder and witchcraft. Burn her. Burn the witch and her demon spawn. But Dr. Harrison shook his head. No, Richard. What she's confessed to is killing 2 people who enslaved her, raped her, murdered her family, and hunted her like an animal. What she's confessed to is fighting back against an evil system in the only way she knew how. He looked around at the gathered slaves, at their shocked and frightened faces. I can't condone murder, but I understand it. God help me. I understand it. You're mad! Mad as the rest of them. I'll have you all— He never finished the sentence. His body suddenly convulsed. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the ground, shaking with seizures. The mercury had finally reached critical mass in his system. Dr. Harrison knelt beside him, checked his pulse, examined his pupils. He's dying. The mercury poisoning is too advanced. He has hours at most, maybe days if he's unlucky. Good, Adeline said flatly. Let him suffer. Let him know what it feels like to be helpless and in pain. Richard died 3 days later, never regaining full consciousness, his body racked with tremors and his mind lost in hallucinations. His last words, witnessed by Dr. Harrison, were, "The witch has won. The witch has won." After Richard's death, the plantation fell into chaos. The overseer tried to maintain control, but without a master, without clear ownership, everything became uncertain. Dr. Harrison, as executor of the Thornwood estate, had to decide what to do with the property, the land, and the 68 enslaved people who lived there. And he had to decide what to do with Adeline.
They held a meeting in the big house 3 days after Richard's death. Dr. Harrison, the overseer Jenkins, the plantation lawyer, Mr. Carmichael, and 2 representatives from the territorial government. Adeline was brought before them, shackled at the wrists, despite the fact she was still recovering from childbirth, still weak and bleeding. Grace was left with Clara, nursing at the breast of another woman since Adeline's milk hadn't come in properly yet. Another small failure that added to her complicated feelings about motherhood. The room smelled of tobacco and old wood and the lingering scent of death. Richard's study, where he had first demanded her medicine, where he had first raped her, was now the place where her fate would be decided. Adeline, Dr. Harrison began, his voice grave, you have confessed to the murders of Richard Thornwood and Catherine Thornwood. Under the laws of Mississippi Territory, this is a capital crime, punishable by death. Do you understand this? Yes, sir. Do you have anything to say in your defense? Adeline looked at the assembled white men, at their
stern faces and careful expressions, and wondered what defense could possibly matter. She was a black woman who had killed 2 white people. The law was clear. Her guilt was not in question. But Dr. Harrison's eyes held something unexpected, a glimmer of sympathy, perhaps even respect. "I do," she said quietly. "Master Richard Thornwood raped me repeatedly for 3 weeks. When I tried to avoid him, he threatened to kill my brother Moses. When I ran away to protect myself and the child I was carrying, he killed Moses anyway, had him whipped to death for defending me. My mother died shortly after from grief and exhaustion and 60 years of enslavement. I lost everything. So yes, I poisoned them. Yes, I committed murder. But I ask you this, what justice was available to me? What court would have heard my case? What law protected me from rape and violence and murder? I used the only weapon I had, my knowledge of plants, to fight back against people who had absolute power over me. If that makes me a murderer, then I'm a murderer. But they were murderers first. I meant every word. I wasn't asking for mercy or forgiveness. I was stating facts. In a just world, I would have been the victim, and Richard would have been the criminal. But we didn't live in a just world. We lived in Mississippi in 1790, where black bodies were property and white violence was law. The room was silent for a long moment. Jenkins, the overseer, cleared his throat. She's admitted her guilt. The punishment is clear. She should be hanged and made an example of. But Mr. Carmichael, the lawyer, shook his head. The legal situation is more complicated than that. Richard and Catherine Thornwood are dead. The plantation has no heirs. The estate is in probate. Technically, Adeline is property of the estate, not a free person who can be tried in criminal court. We would need to establish ownership first, then proceed with charges. That's a technicality, Jenkins argued. The law is built on technicalities, Carmichael countered. One of the government representatives, a thin man named Patterson, leaned forward. There's also the matter of the child. The baby is clearly Richard Thornwood's daughter by blood. She could potentially have a claim to the estate. This caused an uproar. A mixed-race child born to an enslaved woman claiming ownership of a plantation? It was unthinkable. It was outrageous. It was also, legally speaking, possible if no other heirs existed. Dr. Harrison raised his hand for silence. Gentlemen, I think we're losing sight of the larger issue here. Yes, Adeline committed murder. Yes, under normal circumstances, she would be executed. But these are not normal circumstances. She was systematically abused by the people she killed. She was protecting herself and her child the only way she knew how. And frankly, Richard Thornwood was a cruel and unstable man even before the poisoning. I witnessed his treatment of his slaves, his violent tempers, his disregard for their humanity. I'm not saying what Adeline did was right, but I'm saying I understand why she did it. You're suggesting we let a murderer go free? Jenkins was incredulous. I'm suggesting that sometimes justice is more complicated than simple punishment. I'm suggesting that a system that allows rape and murder of enslaved people shouldn't be surprised when those enslaved people fight back. Dr. Harrison was a rare man for his time, someone who saw the contradictions in slavery, who recognized the humanity in black people, even while profiting from their oppression. He wasn't a hero. He still owned slaves himself, still participated in the system, but he had enough conscience to feel conflicted about it, enough humanity to try to mitigate the worst cruelties when he could. The debate continued for hours. Arguments about law and property and morality and precedent flew back and forth. Adeline stood silently, shackled and exhausted, listening to white men decide her fate as white men had always decided her fate. She thought about Grace, wondered if her daughter would grow up enslaved or free, wondered if it even mattered in a world this cruel.
Finally, as the sun began to set, Dr. Harrison made a proposal. Here's what I suggest. The Thornwood estate is worth approximately $30,000, including land, property, and slaves. He grimaced at the word. As executor, I have some discretion in how to settle the estate. I propose we sell the plantation and use the proceeds to settle Richard's considerable debts. The remaining funds will be distributed among the enslaved people here, not as payment for their labor, which they should have been paid for all along, but as settlement for wrongful treatment and suffering. You want to give money to slaves? Patterson was aghast. I want to free them and give them means to survive that freedom. And as for Adeline specifically, I propose we free her and her daughter immediately, provide them with funds to relocate north, and consider the matter closed. She's suffered enough. This plantation has seen enough blood and suffering. That's absurd. She's a confessed murderer. She's a woman who fought back against her rapist and the system that enslaved her. Charge her with murder, and you'll have to acknowledge that Richard raped her. Acknowledge the rape, and you'll have to explain why the law protects white women but not black women. Acknowledge that disparity, and the entire foundation of slavery becomes questionable. Is that really the can of worms you want to open? The room fell silent. Dr. Harrison had cut to the heart of the matter. Adeline's case exposed the fundamental injustice of slavery itself. To prosecute her was to put the entire system on trial. After more debate, a compromise was reached. Adeline would be freed, along with Grace, but they would be transported out of Mississippi immediately, forbidden from ever returning on pain of death. The other slaves on Thornwood Plantation would be sold to other plantations, their lives continuing in bondage, despite Dr. Harrison's noble intentions. The estate would be liquidated to pay Richard's debts. It wasn't justice, it wasn't redemption, it was barely survival, but it was something. I was free. Free to leave Mississippi. Free to take Grace north. Free to try to build some kind of life. But 36 other enslaved people from Thornwood were sold away, scattered to other plantations, their suffering continuing. My freedom came at new cost to the system that had created all this misery. The machine of slavery kept grinding on, crushing lives, destroying families, turning humans into property. I had gotten my revenge on Richard and Catherine, but I hadn't changed anything. Not really. They gave her $300, a small fortune for a formerly enslaved woman, but a pittance compared to what she had suffered. They gave her papers declaring her and Grace free, and they gave her 2 weeks to leave Mississippi forever. Samuel came to her the night before she left. They sat outside the cabin under the stars, the same stars that had watched over countless atrocities, and he held her hand. "Come with us," Adeline said. "Come north. Start a new life." He shook his head sadly. "I can't. I'm still enslaved. Dr. Harrison won't free me. I'm being sold to a plantation in Louisiana. But Adeline, I'm glad you're getting out. I'm glad Grace will have a chance at something better. It's not fair. You helped me. You saved me. And you're being punished for it. That's how this world works. But maybe Grace's world will be different. Maybe her children's world will be different." He touched her face gently. "Promise me you'll tell her about Moses, about your mother, about all of us who didn't make it out. Promise me she'll know where she came from. I promise." They sat together until dawn, two people who had found brief connection in the midst of horror, knowing they would never see each other again.
But the past never stays buried. In the fall of 1795, when Grace was 5½, she came home from school with a strange question. "Mama, who was my father?" Adeline's heart stopped. "What? My father? The other children at school have fathers. I don't. Who was mine?" This was the moment I had dreaded, the moment when I would have to choose between a comforting lie and a terrible truth. I looked at my daughter's innocent face and knew I couldn't lie to her. She deserved honesty, even if honesty hurt. "Your father was a white man named Richard Thornwood," Adeline said carefully. "He was the master of the plantation where I was enslaved. So he freed you? So we could be together?" "No, baby. He didn't free me. He hurt me, and you were born from that hurt." Grace's face scrunched with confusion, trying to understand. "Did you love him?" "No, I didn't love him. I hated him." "Then why did you have me?" "Because I didn't have a choice. When you're enslaved, you don't get to choose what happens to your body. He hurt me, and you came from that hurt. But Grace, listen to me carefully. You are not your father. You are not the hurt that made you. You're my daughter, and you're wonderful, and I love you. Do you understand?" Grace nodded slowly, processing information that no 5-year-old should have to process. "Is he dead?" "Yes." "Did you kill him?" Adeline could have lied, should have lied, but she had started with honesty, and she couldn't stop now. "Yes, I poisoned him because of what he did to me, because he killed my brother Moses, because he was evil and cruel. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not sorry for it either." Grace was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Am I evil like him?" "No, baby. You're good and kind and smart. You're nothing like him. Promise?" "I promise." That conversation changed something between us. Grace knew the truth now, knew she was born from violence, and I waited for her to hate me or her
herself, or both of us, but she didn't. She just climbed into my lap like she always did and asked me to tell her a story about Moses. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, more forgiving, more understanding. The years continued to pass. Grace grew from child to young woman, educated and articulate and passionate about justice. She joined abolitionist societies, spoke at meetings, wrote letters to newspapers. She became everything Adeline had hoped for and more: a voice for the voiceless, a fighter for freedom, a woman who refused to accept the world's cruelty as inevitable. But Adeline herself never fully healed. The trauma of slavery, of rape, of murder, of loss, it marked her permanently. She had nightmares about Richard's study, about Moses's death, about the poison she had prepared with careful hands. She flinched at unexpected touches, struggled with intimacy, carried grief like a stone in her chest. In 1812, when Grace was 22 and Adeline was 46, they received news that Mississippi had banned the importation of slaves from other states. It was a small step, barely meaningful in the face of ongoing atrocities, but it was something. The system was changing, slowly, far too slowly, but changing nonetheless. Do you think it will end in our lifetime? Slavery, I mean? I don't know, Adeline admitted. Maybe not in mine, but maybe in yours. Maybe in your children's. Do you regret what you did? Killing them? Adeline thought about this question carefully. Did she regret poisoning Richard and Catherine? Did she regret taking revenge? I regret that I had to do it. I regret that the world was so broken, so evil, that murder seemed my only option. But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret refusing to be powerless. The revenge was bitter, Grace. It didn't heal me or bring back the people I lost, but it was mine, my choice, my action, my refusal to accept victimhood. That matters. Grace nodded, understanding more than most people ever would. This is the truth about revenge. It doesn't fix you. It doesn't erase trauma or bring peace. But sometimes refusing to be powerless is its own kind of victory. Sometimes fighting back, even if it costs you everything, is the only way to maintain your humanity in an inhumane world. I paid a price for my revenge. I carry the weight of 2 deaths alongside all my other burdens, but I also carry the knowledge that I didn't submit quietly, didn't accept cruelty without resistance. That has to mean something. Adeline died in 1824 at the age of 58, worn out from years of hard labor and trauma. Grace was with her at the end, holding her hand, telling her stories about Moses and Sarah and Samuel, about all the people they had loved and lost. Adeline's last words were, "Tell them, tell our story. Don't let them forget what it cost us." Grace kept that promise. She wrote down everything her mother had told her, every story about slavery and survival and revenge. She spoke at abolitionist meetings, sharing Adeline's story, refusing to let the cruelty and injustice be forgotten or sanitized. She made sure the world knew about Moses, about Sarah, about Samuel, about all the people ground up by slavery's machine. And when slavery finally ended in 1865, 41 years after Adeline's death, Grace was 75 years old, standing in a crowd of celebrating people, crying tears of joy and grief. Joy that it was finally over. Grief that her mother hadn't lived to see this day. The revenge Adeline took was bitter. It didn't change the system, didn't free the enslaved, didn't bring back the dead, but it mattered. It mattered that she fought back, that she refused to be broken, that she survived and ensured her daughter would have a better life. In a world designed to crush black humanity, that was its own kind of revolution.
Freedom ain't what we imagined when we were enslaved, Hannah said. It's not some paradise where all your troubles disappear. You're still black in a white world. You're still poor in a rich world. But it's yours. Your suffering, your success, your choices, they're yours. That's worth something. Armed with Hannah's advice and a few supplies she gifted them, Adeline and Grace continued north, through Kentucky, into Ohio, across terrain that changed from flat farmland to rolling hills
hills to dense forests. Spring was blooming around them, dogwood trees covered in white flowers, birds singing their mating songs, the earth awakening from winter's death. It should have been beautiful, and in a way it was, but Adeline couldn't fully appreciate it. Her mind was too full of memories, too haunted by ghosts. She thought about Moses constantly, wondered if he would be proud of her for escaping, or disappointed in her for killing, wondered if he was at peace wherever dead people went, or if his spirit was restless, angry at the injustice of his short life. She thought about her mother, about Sarah's final words, "Promise me you'll survive. Promise me you'll make sure they remember what they done." She had survived. She had her revenge. But had she honored her mother's memory, or had she just perpetuated a cycle of violence? And she thought about Richard and Catherine, about the two people she had killed through slow poison. She didn't feel guilty exactly, but she didn't feel triumphant either. Revenge had been supposed to bring satisfaction, closure, some sense of justice restored. Instead, it just felt like more death added to an already death-soaked world. Killing them didn't bring Moses back, didn't undo the rape, didn't erase the trauma. It just made me a killer too. Maybe I was justified. Maybe I was right to fight back. But righteousness doesn't make you clean. It doesn't make you whole. I was still broken, still traumatized, still carrying wounds that would never fully heal. They reached Cincinnati in May, a bustling river town where the Ohio River marked the boundary between slave states and free states. Across that river was Kentucky, where slavery was legal. On this side was Ohio, where it wasn't. It was a symbolic border, a line between bondage and freedom, though the reality was more complicated than geography suggested. Adeline found work in Cincinnati as a washerwoman, hard physical labor that paid little but was honest and hers. She rented a tiny room in a boarding house run by a free black woman named Esther, a room barely big enough for a bed and a cradle, but with a door that locked and windows that let in light. It was the first space in her life that was truly hers, where no master could enter without permission, where she could close the door and be safe. Grace grew. Slowly, Adeline began to feel something more than duty toward her daughter. It started small, a flutter of tenderness when Grace smiled in her sleep, a surge of protectiveness when other people looked at her too long, a gradual softening of the hard edges around her heart. It wasn't instant love, wasn't the overwhelming maternal bond that stories talked about, but it was something. It was a beginning. One evening, holding Grace against her chest as she fell asleep, Adeline whispered to her, "I don't know if I'll ever be a good mother to you. I don't know if I can love you the way you deserve, but I promise I'll protect you. I promise I'll make sure you have choices I never had. I promise your life will be different than mine." Grace yawned, utterly unconcerned with promises and the weight of the past, and Adeline felt a smile tug at her lips despite everything. Maybe that was enough for now. Maybe survival and protection were their own kind of love.
5 years passed. 5 years of backbreaking work, of counting pennies, of raising Grace in a world that was free in name but oppressive in reality. Adeline worked as a washerwoman, a cook, a cleaner, whatever work she could find that paid. She saved every dollar she could, planning for Grace's future, determined that her daughter would have education and opportunities, even if she had to work herself to death to provide them. Grace grew into a beautiful, curious child with light brown skin and dark curls. She had Adeline's intelligence and Richard's sharp features, a blend that made Adeline's heart ache every time she looked at her. But Grace was her own person, too, with a laugh that sounded like bells and a stubbornness that came from both sides of her heritage. She asked constant questions. Why is the sky blue? Where do birds go at night? Why can't I play with those white children? Questions that ranged from simple to heartbreaking. Adeline told Grace stories about her grandmother's medicine, about Moses's gentle heart and his beautiful carvings, about Sarah's strength and resilience. She told her about Africa, about their ancestors who were stolen and brought across the ocean in chains, about the knowledge and culture and dignity that survived the Middle Passage. She told her everything except the truth about how Grace had been conceived. That truth could wait. That truth might wait forever. How do you tell a child they were born from rape? How do you explain that half their heritage comes from a monster? I thought maybe I'd I'd never tell her. Maybe I'd let her believe some kinder lie. But children are smart. They figure things out, and I knew eventually Grace would ask questions I couldn't avoid answering. One afternoon in the summer of 1795, a letter arrived. It was from Dr. Harrison in Mississippi, forwarded through several addresses before finally finding Adeline in Cincinnati. Her hands shook as she opened it, afraid of what news it might contain. The letter informed her that Samuel was dead. He had been sold to a brutal plantation in Louisiana, had tried to escape, and had been caught and beaten to death. Dr. Harrison wrote that Samuel had asked about Adeline and Grace before he died, had wanted to know if they had made it north, if they were safe. Harrison had lied and told him yes, because a dying man deserved that small comfort. The letter also contained $200, money that Samuel had somehow saved and hidden, money he had left to Adeline, with instructions to use it for Grace's education. Even in death, even after years of separation, he had been thinking about them. Adeline wept when she read the letter, wept for Samuel's kindness, for his death, for the injustice of a world where good people died in chains, while evil people lived in comfort. She wept for Moses and her mother, and every enslaved person still suffering in the South. She wept until she had no tears left, until Grace climbed into her lap and patted her face and asked, "Why are you sad, Mama?" "Because people I loved are gone," whispered Adeline. "Because the world is cruel and unfair, and beautiful people die before their time." "Like Uncle Moses?" "Yes, baby, like Uncle Moses." Grace hugged her tight, this 5-year-old child offering comfort to her traumatized mother, and Adeline held her back, feeling a rush of love so fierce it actually hurt. Somewhere along the way, without her quite noticing, Grace had stopped being evidence of violation and had become simply her daughter, her brilliant, loving, precious daughter. Love sneaks up on you sometimes. You don't decide to love someone. You just wake up one day and realize they've become essential to you, that their happiness matters more than your own, that you would die to protect them. That's what happened with Grace. I didn't choose to love her. I just looked at her one day and realized I couldn't imagine life without her. Using Samuel's money combined with her savings, Adeline enrolled Grace in a small school run by Quakers who believed in educating black children. It was controversial. Many white people in Cincinnati resented the idea of educated black folks, but the Quakers were stubborn and principled, and they gave Grace access to books and learning and possibilities. Grace thrived in school. She learned to read and write, to do arithmetic, to think critically about the world around her. She asked questions that made her teachers uncomfortable. Why is slavery legal? Why are black people treated differently? Why is the world this way? Questions that had no easy answers, questions that white people preferred not to think about. At night, Adeline would watch Grace practice her letters by candlelight and feel something she had rarely felt before. Hope. Not hope for herself. She knew her life would always be hard, would always be marked by trauma, but hope for Grace's future. Hope that maybe her daughter's world would be different, would be better.
But the past never stays buried. In the fall of 1795, when Grace was 5.5, she came home from school with a strange question. "Mama, who was my father?" Adeline's heart stopped. "What? My father? The other children at school have fathers. I don't. Who was mine?" This was the moment I had dreaded, the moment when I would have to choose between a comforting lie and a terrible truth. I looked at my daughter's innocent face and knew I couldn't lie to her. She deserved honesty, even if honesty hurt. "Your father was a white man named Richard Thornwood," Adeline said carefully. "He was the master of the plantation where I was enslaved." "So he freed you? So we could be together?" "No, baby. He didn't free me. He hurt me, and you were born from that hurt." Grace's face scrunched with confusion, trying to understand. "Did you love him?" "No, I didn't love him. I hated him." "Then why did you have me?" "Because I didn't have a choice. When you're enslaved, you don't get to choose what happens to your body. He hurt me, and you came from that hurt. But Grace, listen to me carefully. You are not your father. You are not the hurt that made you. You're my daughter, and you're wonderful, and I love you. Do you understand?" Grace nodded slowly, processing information that no 5-year-old should have to process. "Is he dead?" "Yes." "Did you kill him?" Adeline could have lied, should have lied, but she had started with honesty,
and she couldn't stop now. Yes, I poisoned him because of what he did to me, because he killed my brother Moses, because he was evil and cruel. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not sorry for it either. Grace was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, am I evil like him? No, baby. You're good and kind and smart. You're nothing like him. Promise? I promise. That conversation changed something between us. Grace knew the truth now, knew she was born from violence, and I waited for her to hate me, or herself, or both of us, but she didn't. She just climbed into my lap like she always did and asked me to tell her a story about Moses. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, more forgiving, more understanding. The years continued to pass. Grace grew from child to young woman, educated and articulate and passionate about justice. She joined abolitionist societies, spoke at meetings, wrote letters to newspapers. She became everything Adeline had hoped for and more: a voice for the voiceless, a fighter for freedom, a woman who refused to accept the world's cruelty as inevitable. But Adeline herself never fully healed. The trauma of slavery, of rape, of murder, of loss, it marked her permanently. She had nightmares about Richard's study, about Moses's death, about the poison she had prepared with careful hands. She flinched at unexpected touches, struggled with intimacy, carried grief like a stone in her chest. In 1812, when Grace was 22 and Adeline was 46, they received news that Mississippi had banned the importation of slaves from other states. It was a small step, barely meaningful in the face of ongoing atrocities, but it was something. The system was changing, slowly, far too slowly, but changing nonetheless. Do you think it will end in our lifetime? Slavery, I mean? I don't know, Adeline admitted. Maybe not in mine, but maybe in yours, maybe in your children's. Do you regret what you did, killing them? Adeline thought about this question carefully. Did she regret poisoning Richard and Catherine? Did she regret taking revenge? I regret that I had to do it. I regret that the world was so broken, so evil that murder seemed my only option. But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret refusing to be powerless. The revenge was bitter, Grace. It didn't heal me or bring back the people I lost, but it was mine, my choice, my action, my refusal to accept victimhood. That matters. Grace nodded, more understanding than most people ever would. This is the truth about revenge. It doesn't fix you. It doesn't erase trauma or bring peace. But sometimes refusing to be powerless is its own kind of victory. Sometimes fighting back, even if it costs you everything, is the only way to maintain your humanity in an inhumane world. I paid a price for my revenge. I carry the weight of 2 deaths alongside all my other burdens, but I also carry the knowledge that I didn't submit quietly, didn't accept cruelty without resistance. That has to mean something. Adeline died in 1824 at the age of 58, worn out from years of hard labor and trauma. Grace was with her at the end, holding her hand, telling her stories about Moses and Sarah and Samuel, about all the people they had loved and lost. Adeline's last words were, "Tell them, tell our story. Don't let them forget what it cost us." Grace kept that promise. She wrote down everything her mother had told her, every story about slavery and survival and revenge. She spoke at abolitionist meetings, sharing Adeline's story, refusing to let the cruelty and injustice be forgotten or sanitized. She made sure the world knew about Moses, about Sarah, about Samuel, about all the people ground up by slavery's machine. And when slavery finally ended in 1865, 41 years after Adeline's death, Grace was 75 years old, standing in a crowd of celebrating people, crying tears of joy and grief. Joy that it was finally over, grief that her mother hadn't lived to see this day. The revenge Adeline took was bitter. It didn't change the system, didn't free the enslaved, didn't bring back the dead, but it mattered. It mattered that she fought back, that she refused to be broken, that she survived and ensured her daughter would have a better life. In a world designed to crush black humanity, that was its own kind of revolution.